Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Property Journey podcast. Episode 11, Roy.
Good stuff.
Obviously, last time out, we were talking about property investment and the different things that you could do to help. This week, we are going to be talking about frequently asked questions along the lines of first-time buyers. We've got Ben in today as well. He's behind the scenes, getting a look at the what we're up to usually on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So first time buyers, Roy, obviously there's quite a few people out there now that are obviously trying to get on the property ladder. A bit like myself, that maybe didn't have an idea of what conveyancing was in the solicitors terms. And the process can be quite difficult for them if they don't know anything about it. So obviously there is frequently asked questions that you would come up against.
Yeah.
So I wanted to run through a few of those and get your responses, and hopefully then any of the listeners out there that are first time buyers, it should help to ease their concerns.
No, definitely. This will be helpful because at this time of year, it's seasonal. So you come into springtime, there's a bit of a bounce in the market. So we've seen literally over the last 4 or 5 weeks, just a number of phone call inquiries, email inquiries from first time buyers. So the first time buyer market is really busy at the minute.
So probably one of the first things that I wanted to touch on that some people do forget about, especially if you are a first time buyer, you kind of forget. Obviously, you're worrying about your mortgage, you're worrying about your estate agent, all that kind of thing. But you sometimes forget about your solicitor's fees, and you maybe don't actually build them in. So could you explain a few of the various costs that are involved when buying your property from a legal perspective?
From a legal point of view, so you need a solicitor to deal with the legal side. So what the solicitor does, goes through all the legal documents, checks everything for you, deals with the mortgage company for you, and draws down the mortgage funds. Now, I appreciate first time buyers, they're maybe saving up and they're maybe very price conscious, and it can be quite common where you get first time buyers who maybe phone round solicitors and get a price. But bear in mind, you always have to make sure you're comparing apples with apples and so on. Just don't simply make that golden mistake of phoning around, getting a price, and then maybe picking the cheapest one, because nobody likes that term cheap. You're not cheap, Chris.
Yeah,
so
well,
but when you're buying a house, don't be cheap.
I try not to be.
Basically, you pick a firm of solicitors or a solicitor that suits your needs. So do your homework on that solicitor, on that firm, get recommendations. But on top of that, just don't simply get a recommendation. What is that recommendation? The friend that recommended, are they a chilled out sort of person, and was the solicitor chilled out? Are you that same sort of a person, or are you maybe a wee bit more intense or highly strung? Because you're not going to have the same personality or you're not going to gel the same with the solicitor. So get the right team member behind you. Cost wise, it can vary. It can vary. You have some solicitors who specialise in property, and that can be, you maybe get a wee bit of a more efficient price because they are very effective. Or on the other side, because they are specialists in property, they have a far better service, more focus, more client focused, and therefore you have to pay a premium for it. But I can't give a costing because it's normally worked out on the value of the house. So generally, the more expensive the house, the higher the land registry fees and so on. So, but if I was to give a ballpark figure, you could be talking the best part of maybe £1,800.
And obviously, because I was going to touch on that, whenever you're obviously looking at fees, there's obviously searches involved in that, and there's fees then maybe associated with that. Obviously, there's various other fees that are filtered in, whether it's obviously for first time buyers, there's obviously stamp duty, depending on whether they need to pay that or not. That's all on the value of the house.
Yes, so generally most first time buyers won't have to pay the stamp duty because they're below the threshold. But out of that ballpark figure that I threw you there, it's made up of land registry searches. As I say, the more expensive the house, the more expensive they are. You've got different searches, bankruptcy searches, EJO searches, There's bank fees have to be put on it, and then on top of that, depending on what what lender you go with, they might ask for further items to be done, which could be like an inhibition or what have you, and that can add an extra £100-200 onto it. And then there's always the good old VAT, which you have to factor in as well. So when you combine that all together with the solicitor's fee, then that's the ballpark figure.
Yeah. And I probably wanted to touch on also that fact, as you said there, when you're thinking about a solicitor or the firm that you're going for, you've touched on it previously where, some solicitors do conveyancing day in, day out. They're conveyancing specialists. They know exactly what they look for. The chances are they've maybe come across issues numerous times in numerous areas. They know exactly sort of what they're looking for, or if there is anything to deal with. And there's other obviously firms there that wouldn't necessarily be dealing with conveyancing weekly or daily. It could be on another, as a case comes in, they might deal with it and they might not see another one then. So obviously be mindful, as you say. Don't base it on the price, base it on what exactly the service is that you need.
Yeah. The conveyancing world is just so fast paced, and there's so many lenders involved, there's so many processes involved, that even if you're doing it on a daily basis, there are times it can be very difficult to keep on top of it. But the key thing is, if you're dealing with a specialist who's doing it day in, day out, they're going to know all the different processes, and they're going to be able to preempt a lot of difficulties that maybe a lot of other solicitors who don't do conveyancing will be able to know about. So therefore it could save you time and effort and stress. And okay, you maybe pick a solicitor who's a wee bit cheaper, but if they aren't able to predict those issues, it could take longer, and you can't put a value on saving time and ultimately removing stress. And the big thing is keep local. Pick a local solicitor, somebody that you can lift the phone to, somebody that you can call into very easily. And sometimes you want to be able to meet them, or even just face to face, as opposed to maybe having to travel a long distance.
So that should pretty much sum up kind of the fee side of things and some of the costing that comes in then for potential first time buyers. The other thing, or one of the other questions that I've noted down then, is any potential legal issues that first time buyers could run into. Is there maybe some common ones that kind of flag up maybe on I don't want to say a regular basis, but they'd be more common than others?
Thankfully, there shouldn't be too many issues or pitfalls that would come up. Probably reduce that risk by having a good survey carried out on the property, which could flag up issues at a very early stage. Probably not more so pitfalls, but maybe things that need to be looked at a wee bit sooner rather than later. So an example could be maybe the house that you're buying has solar panels on the roof, and there's different ways that they can be owned or leased or registered and what have you. And if that's picked up at an early stage, it could be sorted out very quickly if there is an issue. Whereas if you're not forward thinking, there could be an issue with how those the legal side of things are on those solar panels, and could massively drag out the process. I wouldn't say, again, it's not a pitfall, but one thing that a lot of people overlook about is if you're buying a house in a development in a town, and it's a fairly fresh development, so anything built after 2003, 2004, there's normally a management company involved for looking after all the common areas. A lot of people overlook that because they've maybe just so well used to growing up and seeing these developments, but those common areas have to be maintained and have to be looked after and have to be paid for, and it's paid for by the residents. So it's another bill. It's not a pitfall, but it's another bill that first time buyers need to factor in, and that bill could be anything from £150 to maybe £250 per year.
And I want to revert back actually, because I know you've had a couple of inquiries coming in. Management companies is something that has been flagged up by a couple of your clients that have come and been asking questions. They obviously wanted some advice about management companies, the struggles sometimes where they maybe don't exist, or there's maybe current issues with the management company. Where have you seen that before?
So going back to the last crash, the property crash in 2007, 2008, a lot of those developments at that time were being built, and maybe they weren't finished off, or the management company that was supposed to look after them, went bankrupt and went dissolved. That created a lot of legal issues for a number of years. In the very early stages of that, those developments became toxic. Banks didn't want to touch them, buyers didn't want to touch them. But thankfully, as the years have went on, things have changed, and the risks and everything associated with it. So generally, if there is that scenario, probably a good 8 times out of 10, there'll no longer be an issue, because thankfully the Law Society Home Charter, the guidelines that are followed, have now put steps in place which now allows those scenarios to move on ahead. So thankfully, what was previously a pitfall and a bit of a headache, after a great number of years, is now going to very quickly disappear.
And as I say, I only know that just from the inquiries that have come in, and hence why I wanted to ask. How do you ensure then that the property that I'm purchasing has, or first time buyers purchasing, has no legal issues or liabilities attached to it?
Quite a common question that we get asked. So the legal issue side of things, you're putting your trust in the solicitor. That's what their job is to do. Their job is to go through, check the title deeds, and make sure that there's nothing going to come back to bite the buyer. Liability things, most of the time, it will stick with the homeowner personally. You always hear people saying, "Oh, is this house, I don't know what terms, is it black flagged or is it marked or whatever?" That has no impact on the next owner, because if there are any issues, it'll show up in the title deeds and your solicitor can deal with it. But other than that, if the previous owner has racked up a lot of bills, don't worry. If it's not affecting the title deeds, it won't affect you as a homeowner.
And as you say, a lot of those, or the majority of that, is dealt with by the solicitor.
Absolutely,
so it's not really a concern for example, the first time buyer that's coming in through the door. If there is any concerns or whatever, that's up to a solicitor to voice that then as and when it needs to be done.
Exactly, yes.
What are the rights and responsibilities as a buyer when it comes to legal documentation and what needs to be signed?
So signing wise, there's always a contract to sign. That's you basically making an offer to purchase the property, which locks you into the transaction. But rights and obligations, if you're buying either a brand new house or a pre-owned house which was built within the last 24 years, it's going to be more than likely going to be in a development. And if it's in a development, there's always a set of rules, or covenants is what they're known as, that you have to agree to. So the very common ones would be, keep the house insured, keep it maintained, don't run a business from the house, don't cause a nuisance to your neighbours. Those are fairly standard. If it is an older house in the town, you still have covenants. It's going to be leasehold, and there's going to be fairly similar scenarios. The only time is if you buy a property that's based in the country. Most of the time it's freehold, and therefore you're free to do whatever you want.
That's interesting, because I probably would say quite a lot of us would like to live in the country, and that sounds quite nice to be able to just do what we want. But the next thing would be then, what happens if you're buying or selling and the other side pulls out? I think we've touched on it before, obviously, that there's only a certain time frame as to when that can happen. Obviously before maybe a contract is signed, but in the run up to it, for example, someone decides, no, I'm not going ahead with this.
Stay positive, Chris. Stay positive. Don't be jinxing anybody. Normally, thankfully, the vast majority of transactions go through okay. Unfortunately, yes, you do get a very, very small number that fall through. And the reason they fall through is generally fairly genuine and honest. Could be a scenario, maybe a relationship breaks down, maybe somebody isn't able to get a mortgage. Those are the common ones. And very simply, unfortunately, if a transaction falls through, each person just has to pay their own costs. So no matter who's at fault, so if the seller decides to pull out, unfortunately the seller's going to have their legal costs to pay, the estate agent to pay as well. And if the buyer, on that side, the buyer, then they have to pay their legal costs as well. I suppose to put a bit of a comforter on it is, if you've received a quote from your solicitor, for instance, if you're a buyer and you've got a quote, that quote is going to be for the full process the whole way through, right through to registration. Whereas if a transaction falls through maybe halfway through, you're going to pay about probably half of the fee. Now, that's dependent on the solicitor, but generally that would be how a lot of solicitors would operate.
Yeah. No, and yes, we'll try and stay positive.
Stay
We
positive.
obviously don't want transactions falling through, but it was just in case. One of the big ones as well is once it gets to that completion stage, there is always questions about funds. How do funds transfer between a buyer and a seller? How do funds transfer between solicitors? What money do I have to pay? How does that money get paid in? There's always a big question about where the money goes, basically.
Yeah.
How does a solicitor handle the transfer of funds? Obviously once completion has been agreed.
They just click a button and the money comes in. Unfortunately, that's the myth. That's the myth that everybody thinks is as easy as the buyer phones a solicitor. I want to complete tomorrow. Just click a couple of buttons there and get the money through. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. Although it is a lot easier than what it was 10 years ago. So a few years ago, if a solicitor was looking money, they simply had to fill out a big form and go through all the title deeds and have it all certified. And at that point, the bank would release the money. Due to modern technology and portal systems, that process is a lot less time frame. The solicitor still has to make sure that you check off title and that they're happy with everything. They go in, log into a system, check everything off, click a few buttons, and then the bank, it's up to the bank then to release the money. Banks do ask for generally a minimum of 3 to 4 working days. Now, okay, yes, they could send the money through a lot more quickly, but you have to work to their time frames. If they say it takes up to 4 working days, we have to allow them 4 working days. And if we get the money sooner, happy days. Then that's the mortgage money comes in from the mortgage company. The buyer will then have to send their deposit money through to the solicitor. That comes into the solicitor, and then the solicitor sends all the money over to the seller solicitor. That all takes time. Even though it's all digital, it takes time to go from bank to solicitor. Has to be checked off, has to be a payment set up, has to be authorized, has to be received at the other end. That all takes time as well. So that's the flow of the money.
That's the flow of the money. And probably one of the other things then is obviously when it comes to actual people transferring those types of amounts of money as well, because we are talking about property. It's not £500 here and £200 here. We're talking large amounts of money. Obviously, if the best place to go and speak to if you're having problems with that as well is go to your bank.
Yeah.
They'll be able to help you through if you've got, say, for example, withdrawal limits or, that side of things. Then if you can only transfer a certain amount or whatever, go to your bank. They'll be able to help you out then whenever it comes to that then.
The safest thing as well is always get, if you can, a hard copy of the bank details from the solicitor. So it's a hard copy, hasn't been emailed to you. There's been no way that it's been intercepted. There's been no way that you've jotted down the details incorrectly or made a mistake. There's no way you've taken the details over the phone and again made a mistake writing them down. If you have a hard copy straight in front of you, it's black and white. You can go into the bank. Most banks nowadays are able to put those details in and confirm that that is the correct recipient, and safe as houses.
Yeah. And that again, that's a big thing that we haven't touched on, but when it comes to the likes of fraud now and scams and stuff like that there, it is so prominent. And when it comes to large amounts of money, the safest bet is make sure, as you say, go and get a hard copy where you're seeing the person write it down in front of you or give you a copy of it in black and white, and at least the details are correct so that it can't go AWOL.
It is good just on that note, if you're working with a local solicitor and you've got to know them and you've built up the rapport with them, if you do get a strange phone call from somebody that you've never dealt with before, pretending to be from that office, you'll know exactly because you've been dealing with a specific person. And then likewise, the solicitor should explain their process to you, which then likewise you'll know that if you get an email or a phone call or something else that's completely out of the blue, you immediately know that doesn't sound right. And again, if you're dealing local, you can hop in the car and walk in to the solicitor's office just to check it straight away.
Yeah. No, totally agree. One of the other big things then is we've probably again previously touched on it, but it is a frequently asked question, and that is obviously the role of land registry and obviously having your property registered. Again, that's an area for a solicitor to worry about.
Solicitor takes care of all of that. That all actually happens after you get your keys. A lot of people think that the day they get their keys, that's their solicitor has finished and they're now sitting with their feet up, drinking coffee all day. There's still more work to be done, and that work is they submit the application to Land Registry. Land Registry occasionally will have queries, what about this, is that right, check that, we need a wee bit more information, because they're sometimes maybe just double checking what the solicitor has sent through and confirming it, and then they complete registration. So registration could take anything from 1 month to 6 months after you've got your keys, and all that time the solicitor is still working away behind the scenes to make sure that your house is correctly registered in your name, and then also on behalf of the bank to make sure the mortgage is registered as security against the house as well.
Yeah. And as you say, there is still work there that needs to be done, after the completion date's been confirmed and you're maybe moved in as a first time buyer and you're enjoying your, nice new home. The solicitor's still working away doing, as you said, the examples of that in the background. Something that we probably should have maybe started with, because it essentially is the start of the process, is the government schemes incentives then for first-time buyers. We've, I think, done a podcast on co-ownership and those maybe more detailed version of us talking about those types of schemes. But is the main one at the minute co-ownership then for any of those help,
Generally, yes. So you have now in England there's different schemes. So if you are doing your research, just make sure that it is linked to Northern Ireland. But you would have the co-ownership, which is basically a government-backed organisation that helps fund purchase. So it might be the case that they put up half the money, a quarter of the money, whatever way it can be negotiated, and then you rent part of the house off them. It's a fantastic way to get onto the property market if you have a low deposit amount. And another way, which, as you know, I'm always an advocate of saving and being prepared and planning ahead, is starting to save at a very, very early age. And you can make use of a lifetime ISA. So it's basically, an ISA is like a savings account, but it's specifically linked to property, so that you put money away every single month, and then at the end of each tax year, then the government gives you a bonus for it. And it can be the scenario that you can use it for buying the house, and if you don't use it, not to worry, it rolls on and you can use that, continue to save into it, and you can use it later on in life then as part of your pension.
And that's an interesting one, as you say, because if you start that and you're obviously getting a bonus, and we'll describe it as free money, because everyone likes free money, it should be something to look at, because if you are able to get those bonuses and stuff, and you can start now, for example, if you're 17 or 18 or 19 listening to this and you're thinking about wanting to buy your first home in maybe 4 or 5 years time or whatever, start now, let it build up over 4 or 5 years, and you never know, you might have a nice wee chunk sitting then for your first home. Can you recommend any maybe additional services or professionals that you may need to talk to maybe during the process or think about after, once you've maybe bought your first home?
Well, just as always, for every house property or for every purchase, you need your team. Bring your team together. So again, get your good solicitor on board, good mortgage advisor on board, who's able to see your circumstances, probably know exactly, right, well, that would maybe suit better this lender or that lender, and basically get that mortgage rolling for you very quickly. Having the house surveyed at an early stage as well, particularly the older the house it is, get a survey done, and then probably maybe a good builder or good construction company or maintenance company, so that if there's a few things that needs to be done to the property, then that can all be done fairly quickly and within a budget that you can afford.
And one of the big things as well, and I keep saying it, and it keeps cropping up on my social media, whether it's news articles, whatever it happens to be, is property owners having a will.
Mm-hmm.
How important is that?
As soon as you have an asset, you should be protecting it. A lot of people overlook the fact, they've got a house, but they don't realize there's equity in the house. Whether you're a first-time buyer or you've owned a house for years, you've worked hard for that house. You want to make sure it's protected. So a scenario would be if something happens to you and you pass away, then there's equity, there's money there that needs to be dealt with. And depending on the circumstances, if you don't have a will and you don't have things set up correctly, a lot of money is initially lost. For instance, with legal fees and disputes and what have you. And then again, there's always that worst case possibility that the money could go to the state, to the crown. So I appreciate first time buyer, you're just focused on I want to get the keys and I'm living the dream and I've got the plan ahead of me. But put a will in place, protect what you've saved for, protect what you're paying, what you're getting up every single morning for to pay that mortgage. Protect it and put a will in place. The solicitor can sort that out for you, and it's not overly expensive. What it's costing you compared to what it's going to save you if you don't have one is night and day.
Yeah, and again, I would tend to agree with that. And also then obviously, alongside the wills, you've got your powers of attorney as well, that if there was anything ever obviously cropped up where you became incapable for, even if it was a certain period of time, ensuring that someone can take control and be able to maybe pay off, pay off your mortgage or continue to pay it if you've obviously got the funds to be able to do so. It was something that I have seen where it's wills and powers of attorney and making sure that you have it if you have or are purchasing a property. Is there any ongoing legal obligations that as a property owner you need to be thinking about then? Obviously there's maintenance, maybe insurance side of things, compliance with local regulations.
As you said, it's literally the typical bills, which are you've got your mortgage, you must continue to pay that every single month, or else there's a possibility of the house being repossessed. Then you have your rates to pay to the local council. You would have the management company service charge to look after the common areas in the development. Then house insurance. It's always good to have house insurance so that if there's a fire or a flood or some sort of damage that you're covered. There's other insurances which are very important as well. Life insurance, critical illness. If you're sick, things like that pays out the mortgage. And just generally just the upkeep of the property so that you're not causing a nuisance or an annoyance to the neighbours as well.
That is all my frequently asked questions that I've managed to come up with. Some of them obviously have been inquired before, and obviously we've maybe only spoke to one person at a time. Wanted to obviously share them with a wider audience. Is there any others, Roy, that you maybe off the top of your head that you can think of, or is that kind of a good basis for first-time buyers then?
The main question that we get asked is how long does it take, and when am I getting my keys? So how long is it going to take is really, really difficult to give an estimate. The Law Society carried out research at the end of 2023, and the industry standard was 16 weeks from you agreeing to buy a house to getting your keys. Now, that time frame can vary in a number of ways. Firstly, depends on the transaction itself. If you're buying a brand new house that's being built, well, you have to wait till the house is physically built. Yeah. If you're in a chain, the more people that's involved, the longer it's going to take. That has an impact. But if you're simply a first-time buyer, you're buying a pre-owned house and the house is empty and you're able to get your mortgage fairly straightforward, there's a lot of ifs, then you could be talking as little as maybe 7-8 weeks. So the other question then is, when do I get my keys? Don't focus on the keys or the completion date. That's something that's completely out of your control. The amateur person, first-time buyer will probably have that as their first question and their first focus, but that's something that's completely uncontrollable. Whereas you're safer waiting until there's a set period when you sign the contract where you can easily then enter into negotiations of a time frame. And that's a time frame that will mutually suit you as the buyer, suit your solicitor, suit your lender, suit the seller, and suit the seller's solicitor. So you have 5 people there to work out and to agree a date, not just you. So you have to be a wee bit, not a wee bit selfish about it. There's plenty of time, as I said, to discuss, which allows you time to book off work, give your notice to your current rental property, organise removals, deliveries and things like that. Because a big scenario that we see very commonly is people get overexcited and they go and order the sofa and they order the bed and it's going to be delivered on a particular date and they don't have the keys, and the whole drama is I've ordered a sofa and I can't get it into the house.
Yeah.
You know, that's a situation you've created that despite regardless advice. So just stay calm, get the contract signed, discuss a date, and then you've got loads of time to start worrying about getting that sofa and getting that bed.
And probably, as you say there, the good thing is your solicitor, who's been doing it daily, sees the amount of transactions that are happening. And we've had this conversation about chain of transactions where someone's buying, but they're also selling, and they're waiting on the person that they're buying off to sell, and they're waiting on the person to sell that's buying, and vice versa. You know, there's chains there. You can't very easily just turn around and say, "Oh, we'll complete, tomorrow."
Yeah.
And that's it, done, dusted. Sure, happy days. I'll give you your keys.
Yeah.
You know, your solicitor that you're obviously using will know exactly how things are going to be working, and they'll be able to keep you right, especially as a first-time buyer who may or may not know very much about conveyancing. They will be the ones that
trust the solicitor. It's like walking along a tightrope. It's going to be much easier to walk across a tightrope with your eyes closed and holding the hand of somebody.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if you don't hold somebody's hand, you don't trust them, and you're looking around you, you're going to panic. It's just chill and trust the solicitor.
We'll leave it there then, Roy. That is episode 11, frequently asked questions by first-time buyers. Again, we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much, everyone, for staying tuned to this episode, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you.